All right, let's open the case file on one of the weirdest and honestly most disturbing military legends of the 20th century. We're diving deep into a story that just completely blurs the line between science fiction, secret wartime projects, and, well, pure horror. We're talking about the Philadelphia experiment.
Think about that for a second. It's a simple but totally shocking statement. Right in the middle of World War II, at a packed naval shipyard, a huge U.S. Navy destroyer, the USS Eldridge, just vanished. Not just off the radar, I mean it vanished from plain sight.
And this is where the story takes a turn from a wild military mystery into an absolute nightmare. Because the ship did come back, but the crew, they came back changed in ways that are just impossible to wrap your head around. Some of them were found physically, molecularly fused into the steel of the ship itself.
So what in the world was the U.S. Navy supposedly trying to do? Well, the story goes this wasn't some freak accident. It was a top-secret experiment, codenamed Project Rainbow. And its objective was something that could have totally changed the course of the war.
The science behind this is pretty wild. The whole project was supposedly based on Albert Einstein's unified field theory, a concept so out there, he never even finished it himself. The basic idea was to create electromagnetic fields so incredibly powerful that they could literally bend light and radio waves around an object, making it completely invisible.
So you see, the goal here was bigger than just simple stealth. It was about making the USS Eldridge a total ghost. First, make it invisible to enemy radar. Second, create this kind of electromagnetic bubble that would make it safe for magnetic mines, which were a huge threat back then. And to pull it off, they supposedly packed the ship with these massive, one-of-a-kind experimental generators. Okay, so let's jump to the actual day of the experiment. The eyewitness accounts, they paint this bizarre, almost otherworldly picture. You know, this wasn't some quiet, subtle test. It was a spectacle. And this timeline just shows you how strange this whole thing supposedly was. 9 a.m., the generators fire up. A few minutes go by, and this weird, sickly green fog starts to swallow the ship. And then, poof, it's gone. But here's the part that's just impossible. At almost the exact same time, the Eldridge is apparently spotted in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away. So it seems it didn't just become invisible, it accidentally teleported. Then, just as fast, it vanished from Norfolk and blinked back into existence in Philadelphia. So, in a really terrifying way, the experiment worked. The ship disappeared. But that's not where the story ends, not even close. The real story shifts from the incredible technology to the horrifying price paid by the men on board. So you have to wonder, right? When that green fog finally cleared and the generators spun down, what did they find on that ship? What happened to the sailors who were just ripped through space and time?
The reports are the stuff of horror movies. Seriously. Men were found literally fused into the ship's metal structure. Their skin and bones and the steel bulkheads just became one. Some were even still alive. Others had just spontaneously burst into flames. The survivors were completely traumatized, some suffering from this thing called the freeze, where they'd just become totally immobile for days. And the vast majority? They were declared insane and hidden away from the world.
Now, with an outcome that catastrophic, of course, the official story is that it never happened. But years later, the whole thing came roaring back to life, all thanks to one man who claimed he saw everything. This guy, who called himself Carlos Allende, said he was a sailor on a merchant ship nearby, the SS Andrew Forsyth. And from where he was standing, he claimed he saw the whole thing, the green fog, the ship disappearing, and the horrifying mess when it came back.
For years, this was just a crazy sailor story. But then, in the 1950s, Allende started writing all these letters to a guy named Morris K. Jessup, who was a UFO researcher. And in those letters, he laid out the entire story, with all these details that basically created the legend as we know it today.
And this is where the story gets even darker. Jessup actually started taking these claims seriously and began to investigate. And then, not long after, he was found dead in his car. The official cause was suicide, but the timing was just so suspicious. It's fueled all these theories that he was silenced for getting too close to a terrifying truth. So this leaves us with two stories that absolutely cannot both be true. On one side, you have this wild, terrifying conspiracy, and on the other, you have a flat-out official denial. I mean, the two sides are just worlds apart. The allegation is this sci-fi nightmare come to life. The official denial from the Navy is absolute. They say Project Rainbow never existed, and they have ship logs that prove the USS Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia on that date. They say the ship was involved in some classified experiments with something called degaussing, which uses electromagnetic fields to make ships invisible to magnetic mines, not to the human eye. So the theory is, maybe some sailors saw this weird degaussing process, and over time, their imaginations just ran wild.
So why does this story just refuse to die? Well, one of the biggest theories is that the experiment wasn't really a failure. They just realized they couldn't make it safe for humans. So the theory goes, the Navy didn't scrap the tech, they perfected it. And that knowledge eventually evolved into the radar-absorbing materials and the incredible designs we see today in things like the B-2 stealth bomber.
So that's the question we're left with, right? Is the Philadelphia experiment a story about the terrifying human cost of science going too far? A secret so awful it had to be buried forever? Or is it just one of the greatest maritime ghost stories ever told, born from wartime rumors and one man's strange letters? The truth? Well, who knows? It might still be out there.